Hi folks, welcome to Dinesh Tech Bytes, Fix My Kubernetes Cluster, episode 3. Yeah, so this episode will be very similar to the previous episodes where we will create a brand new Kubernetes cluster and break the cluster and try to create some resource and see if this resource is successfully able to create. If not, then let's try to fix the Kubernetes cluster and make sure that the pods or the resources are able to proceed running. And what is the concept behind it, and how we break the cluster in the first phase. I don't have any clusters available. Let me create a brand new cluster now with the issue. So I'm using kind as discussed before. It should be able to create cluster very quickly. Yeah, the cluster is created and it has applied a pod called nginx1 and the pod is in pending state. Let's check that kubectl get pods and the pod is in pending state. Let's try to describe that pod. Doesn't have any events and it is still in a pending state. So let's see if the scheduler is running fine or not. kubectl, I mean, because scheduler is the component which schedules this pod. The pod is not its schedule. So let's see kubectl get pods in kube system namespace. Yeah, we see all pods are running, but we see that a scheduler is restarted sometimes before. Let's check the logs of the scheduler. So let me copy this name. So kubectl logs -f -n kube system namespace. Maybe let me do tail of only 100 logs. Okay, if I see here, we are getting this logs and we are getting an error saying like failed to watch this node. Okay, nodes is forbidden. Failed to list the node because it's forbidden. The user system : kube scheduler cannot list resource called nodes. Similarly, it is not able to get pod description budgets and other list pods, everything. The scheduler doesn't have access. So there isn't some access issue for the scheduler to talk to the API server and fetch resources, and then only it can schedule it. So there is an access issue. Let's try to understand that one. So uh, let's see the list of cluster roles that are present in this system. If you see, we have so many roles. Like there are like some admin cluster roles, and we have some predefined cluster roles called system : and some. This is for controllers. Controllers that, for example, like endpoint controller have this cluster role. Similarly, we have a lot of cluster roles. Similarly, we have system : kube scheduler role, kube DNS. So we have a kube scheduler role. Let's quickly see that kube scheduler role. If you see, this is saying like, okay, in the events, it can do create patch update. So pods it can. So we have a cluster role for this system kube scheduler with proper roles defined. Now let's check the role binding. So in Kubernetes, there will be roles created, there will be users, and there will be binding. So in terms of users, the users can be either actual user who is having some certificates or the or a service account. Now let's and the binding is needed between this role and the user. So if I do the get cluster role binding, so again we have a lot of cluster role binding. So we have cluster role binding for kube controller, kube manager, kube DNS, but for the kube scheduler, the cluster role binding is missing. So let's create a cluster role binding for this kube scheduler. If I do help, so I can do kubectl create cluster role binding name user. Let's copy this, and in this case, let's copy this cluster role, and let's create a cluster role binding. I'm creating a cluster role binding with the same name as the role. with cluster role equal to the kube scheduler, and the user, if you see the error, the username is also system::kube scheduler. So we created a role binding for the kube scheduler, cluster role binding. So which means this access has been given to this user. So which means using this user, the kube scheduler can get pods, list pods, get nodes, and it can do the binding. Let's do kubectl get pods to see if the scheduler is working now. Let's see the logs now. It successfully acquired the leader thing, get pods. Yeah, once we have fixed, sorry. Yeah, so once we have fixed the permissions, it is able to start assigning this pending, because it is able to get the list of pods and found it there is a pending pod and get the list of nodes, and it is able to assign it. Now, if you see the events, just 40 seconds before, the default scheduler is able to know there is a pending pod and able to assign it, and then kubelet was able to pull and do things. Let me quickly show you where is the user is defined for the kube scheduler. Let me do SSH into the my Kubernetes cluster. I'm inside the Kubernetes cluster, etc Kubernetes. If you see here, we have an admin conf, kube controller manager conf, scheduler conf. If we see what is the scheduler conf, this is nothing but a certificate-based kube config file created, which is having an user called system kube scheduler. For this user, we have a client key and the client data. So it is a certificate-based authentication. And for this user, we have assigned the, so this is only authentication. But for this user, we have given the access using the cluster role binding. Now the scheduler is able to talk to API server and authorize to list and get nodes and the pod represent and other things. So this is how, so yeah, basically what I'm trying to say here. So this is how the core components like control manager, scheduler, kubelet will use the certificate-based credential to talk to the API server for authentication. And using the RBAC, they will be authorized to do a few access. So in terms of scheduler, can update the pods. Similarly, kubelet can list the pods and do things. So this is how each component is doing the authentication and authorization in the Kubernetes core components. Yeah. Yeah, we saw about the RBAC, like how RBAC is used for authorization of the core components in the Kubernetes. Yeah, let me show you how I broke the cluster in the first place. Let me do cat create cluster. So what basically we have done, once we do a create a cluster, we wait for a few seconds for the node pool and the default service account to be created. Once that is done, we do kubectl delete that role binding. So we just delete that role binding and create the pod. As part of the fix, we recreated that role binding. Yeah, thanks everyone. If you find this useful, please share your comments and like this video. Thank you.